Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
And we are live. So welcome everybody. Welcome Yasmin and Brent to Points of View on Teacher Talk Radio. So this show is brought to you by two of our sponsors, Kialo Edu. BET award-winning Kialo Edu is the 100% free tool for thoughtful and inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialoedu.com. And our second sponsor is John Catt. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development, books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. So, unsurprisingly, our first topic today is the teacher recruitment crisis. I mean, we could have done this at any stage, but there's been a new report out this week. The National Foundation of Educational Research says unfilled vacancies at a record high, recruitment into teacher training remains persistently low. The government faces a now or never moment to hit its target of recruiting 6,500 new teachers in England by the end of its term. So our question is, can we ever solve the teacher recruitment crisis? So your thoughts, Brent?
Well, I'm sitting in the trenches waiting for the cavalry to come to relieve us. We've been fighting this war for a long time and we're not getting fresh supplies and we're not getting fresh troops. So we just got to make do. And honestly, it's been 9 months, and I have to question where this Labour government's actual priorities are, because they seem to find money for other things. But education, apart from their flagship policy of VAT in private schools, which really doesn't do very much for us, there's not really much else. Ofsted's not being reformed. The mood music is starting to change. And there's two sides to this. There's the recruitment side of it, fresh troops coming in, and then there's the battle weariness of those of us in the trenches who are basically fatigued. And austerity politics is not going to cut it. This George Osborne thing of we're all in it together, there's no money. I don't buy it, never bought it whatsoever. There's always money when they want to build £22 billion for carbon capture, which it doesn't work, or HS2. I'm getting tired myself, and people like myself are just getting so fed up that 8% of people left teaching last year. So the meagre target of 6,500, because it is a meagre target, was a very low target, and they haven't even met that. So beyond pathetic, I think it's pathetic. I think the government needs to get a real grip on this, and I think the mood is going to change pretty quickly within the teaching profession, and the honeymoon period is over. So either the Labour government stump up money for education like they did in 1997 and have a vision for education, or they're slowly going to see managed decline. And I'm not even saying managed decline, because at the moment it's not even being managed into decline. It's just an utter free fall. And that's not hyperbole. That's what's happening on the ground. So we need relief. We need the troops to come and rescue us. We need more staff. But we also, the idea of workload being reduced is important. But if they think artificial intelligence is going to be the answer, I want to put this out. All the technology in the last 20 years has not made my workload less. The internet has not made my workload less. Artificial intelligence thus far has not made my workload of anything. They seem to think, well, that's okay, you can do more with less. So this idea of constantly squeezing more out of us to the point we just can't give any more has reached a point, because schools aren't no longer education establishments. We're everything now. We're front-facing services. And what I've seen is a decrease in the number of staff in the classroom, but actually an increase in the number of people doing random jobs in schools I can't even understand. So the actual number in the classroom is kids getting the number of children is increasing in my school. The number of staff is static. The number of subjects I'm teaching is increasing. The number of subjects I'm having to classes I'm having to cover is increasing. The number of colleagues who aren't there, the number of support staff is increasing. I tell you who's making an absolute fortune. Supply agencies are making an absolute killing at the moment.
Yeah.
So honestly, we need basically the cavalry to come and rescue us. So we need that cavalry to come straight away when this government arrived, and they haven't sent a thing really. Yasmin,
what are your thoughts on that?
I just think when I think about teacher recruitment, I think that the key, I often feel like a lot of the focus is on the wrong things. Like I feel like a big link to teacher recruitment is teacher retention, like keeping the people at the profession there already. And I know there's a lot of discussion on behavior, there's a lot of discussion on workload, there's a lot of discussion on pay, but actually so many of the teachers that I know, and obviously I know that's a very small number in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the teachers I know actually, you know, they're willing to take on, you know, behavior. They knew what the pay was when they were getting into teaching and things. And actually it's a lot of the other stuff. Like I think for me, a lot of the problem in teaching is actually a problem with the behavior of other staff, actually other teachers. I think a lot of teachers drive other teachers out of the profession. And I think too much in teaching, like there's this kind of sink or swim mentality where it's a bit of a lottery. Like someone can have an amazing time in, you know, one school and someone else can have a really horrible time in another. And I just think that if you want more teachers to join the profession, then you need to be treating all of the teachers already there with dignity and respect and all these other things. And actually, I think it's all too common to hear about experiences of teachers that haven't been like that. You know, like I actually, like even on social media, I see a lot of responses to a lot of negative comments on teaching that aren't related to pupils, aren't related to workload, aren't related to pay, and actually are about how they've been treated by line managers or senior leadership. So for me, actually, I just think that the focus is often, I mean, rightly on things like behavior and workload, but also misses the mark a lot with talking about, you know, what kind of, I don't know, regulations or whatever can be put in place to support staff who aren't having or who feel like they've experienced bullying from other teachers, because these things have a lasting impact. Like I remember when I was at university, I knew of a teacher who, even though I quite liked the idea of teaching, a big part of why I didn't want to go into teaching was because I actually knew a teacher who'd had like a petition made against them unfairly by parents, and the staff didn't back them. And, you know, they were suspended for almost a year. And as somebody, you know, who I was like 19, 20 when I heard about this, and when I finished university and, you know, I was approached by Teach First and, you know, was considering a PGCE, I didn't want to do it because I thought, well, actually teaching isn't really nice to teachers. Like other teachers aren't nice about other teachers. So that's what put me off. And I didn't actually go into teaching straight away because of it. So for me, I think a lot of it is in how the teachers are treated, not just by pupils or parents, but also by other teachers, is something that should be discussed, because I think it hits close to home for a lot of teachers. So that's how I think of it, really.
Tajinda?
I mean, a lot of what both of you said really resonates, it has to be said. Sorry, I mean, I left teaching for a bit. I did have like a space of like 3 years where I left and did other things, mostly because of workload, but because it was just a silly era where, you know, like you had to like mark with 1 billion pens and all the rest of it. And I just it got ridiculous. It got so ridiculous that I always, when I tell the story, it still seems ridiculous to me. So I lived around the corner from my brother. literally round the corner, and I did not have the time to go and visit him, and that's ridiculous. So I actually like him, right? You know, it's not even like his family that I don't want to visit. So actually, I like being around him, and I genuinely did not have the time. And like Brent's saying, some of these things that we've been asked to do not improve the job, but there seems to be no feedback mechanism there where you can turn around and say, do you know what, this is what's happening. So I think the idea behind it was to be better for the pupils, to have this feedback link, but because the research behind it was so poor, and no one was really looking at it, it was just like, what will get us through Ofsted, what will get us through Ofsted. And I do understand that Ofsted have made some strides in terms of like trying to remove some of that. I'm not going to like say that the Manchester Women did nothing, because that's not fair. There were things that were removed, and we will always have to have accountability. However, I do wonder about the training that we have and whether it's ongoing, and also for our leaders as well. Do they have the adequate training? Because I think sometimes what happens is with the best will in the world, they're asked to step up and do a job that they've got very little training to do. And so much of it has to come on the job itself that invariably you're going to end up making mistakes. But the other point that I wanted to make was that I do think there's still a hangover from the era of individually grading teachers, which I think just destroyed collegiality. It was mirror, mirror on the wall, who's most outstanding of them all. But it's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous situation. So if you could just jump through some hoops on one occasion for like 30 minutes, you got to be outstanding. And people protected it. And that collegiality that we should have right from the beginning towards each other just got destroyed. I mean, I still remember like having a colleague like that, you know, particularly like early on. And it was awful because, you know, I needed help. I needed training. And I think I got lucky in the sense that I, like yourself, Yasmin, I didn't go in straight away. I probably went in later than you did, but still, at least I was old enough to not collapse under the weight of like having to try and do it all myself.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it was great. It doesn't mean that it didn't take time to learn, and the time that it takes to get confident as well. Because that's the other thing. Who wants to go in and do a job and feel like they're doing it badly day in, day out? No one does. And in the end, that's what happens. And just one last point that I want to make, and this is in response to Yasmin, and sorry, actually to both of you, to both Brent and Yasmin, is having been in teaching, having left it, having come back, one of the things that I say that I think probably most people don't want me to say and probably don't like is that there is no real penalty to leaving teaching. There's no penalty. If you leave teaching, right? So when I was doing an admin job and I wanted to get another admin job, right, I was scrutinized over it quite a bit, it has to be said. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it'd be like, well, why are you leaving that job? Why do you want this one, etc., etc. You go into it, you know, you go for a job after you've left teaching, they don't scrutinize you in the same way. They kind of understand. I mean, you still have to obviously apply for it. You need to have the skills, you need to have whatever, but they're not going to ask you and speak to you about why you're leaving in the same way, unless there's something obvious that needs to be flagged up, right?
Yeah.
And we need to understand this as a profession, that if we were in any other profession, there would be a penalty that we would have to, like, we somehow have to pay, or we'd have to prove that we just want to progress in our careers, etc., etc. But if you leave teaching, actually most people understand, and we've got too many people out there who understand the situation because they themselves have left teaching, right? So they're going to be sympathetic, they're going to be empathetic to what you've had to face.
So what you're really saying, what you're saying is that the narrative is, you've escaped.
Yeah, that is an unfortunate. You're totally
Congratulations,
right.
you've escaped.
Can I say, Brent, off the back of that anti-gender, I feel like a big part of it is the overall attitude to teachers in the UK. Like, I feel like even when you look at the rise in parental complaints, like, I think it's so weird that you can make front page news, like, or you could just be in a newspaper because you're like a kid who's refused to wear or follow the uniform policy in your school, and suddenly the Sun are interested in, giving you a double pay.
BBC sometimes.
Yeah. And so I feel like for me, another big part of, I know it was really cynical earlier, but like, I feel like another big part of teacher recruitment and retention is discussing the overall attitude to teachers in wider society. That's a big part of it. Honestly, I remember, like, when I was a kid, if somebody said, oh, you'd make a great teacher, it was like an insult. Growing up in inner city London, like, I'll never be a teacher. And now as a teacher, kids say that to me. And I always say, look, guys, I'm not offended. Like, I grew up, with the same kind of attitudes. But also at the same time, I'm from a culture, like, I'm Somali. I'm from a culture where teachers are respected. Like, I grew up in a household where my mom considered teaching the most important job ever. So like, and that carries through in how she dealt with.
There's
the
two things
schools
with Yasmin I agree with.
Yeah.
Is that one? It's not just that. I come from a culture that values education. I'm working class. My parents are a plasterer and a housewife. Out of my cousins, 24 cousins, 22 of us went to university. I've got PhDs everywhere in my family. We grew up in that kind of environment. My teachers were sacrosanct. They were members and pillars of the local community. They served in the altar. They worked at the church. They did charity work. They are still members of the pillars of the community. They were respected. They were revered. And when they got it wrong, they were called out by the community. And there's what we're losing as well. People are losing the connection to their schools. They've lost identity. They've become businesses. They become cold. They become harsh. The relationship is not there. But it comes like this. The disrespect starts at the top. The way that this successive governments have disrespected education, and the way that they've teacher bashed, and the way they've allowed that narrative to hell, and the likes of certain media have just absolutely go with it. I know how many times I ring into local, likes of LBC, and have to defend the teaching profession. Local websites are always doing clickbait of schools doing this, schools doing that. The narrative is it's pile on to schools, pile on to teachers, pile on to education, and it's pushed down because it comes to accountability. What was basically Tarjandi was saying about accountability. The greatest accountability is actually at the people at the bottom. The least accountability is the absolute donkeys that led us through. The Department of Education is absolutely gutted out and made better because they have made mistake after mistake, and they are in there after successive governments. So they know the score. And successive governments can take a bit of time to get their handle on education. But the people in the Department of Education know exactly what's going on. And honestly, when they were partying during COVID, I lost all respect for them. So we need better managed. We need better run. We need better people advocating. Where is the people advocating and standing up for education? Where's the champions of education? Where are those people out there saying education is the most important thing? Rishi Sunak, before the last election, said education is the silver bullet to solve all of country's problems. But what did he do about that except want to increase MADs till 18? We hear hollow words, we just don't see the actions. And the actions, and I think parents have caught on. They go, well, if schools are so run down anyway, and if schools don't get that money, and there's not a teacher in the school, why am I sending a child to school? I just think education has just been so downtrodden that people just accept it's not that important. And then, therefore, we're not that important.
Sorry, can I try and just...
When, for example, I agree, governments have not helped. I don't think parents have helped sometimes. I also think our own unions haven't helped sometimes either, with their own sort of political bents. So when you've got the biggest union of teachers in this country supporting something like no more exclusions. Now, if you want to personally believe in that, that's up to you. But if you're going to genuinely turn around and say we must never exclude in any school ever, and not understand that actually there may very well be good reasons for that. If they're going to take our dues and pay for that, well, we are going to look like dupes, then aren't we? Because there's not a single other union that would ever accept abuse of its members the way that they have.
Yeah.
There's
so I just... Oh, sorry. I think we've...
I'm sorry. As a union rep, I'm going to take exception to that. It is the unions that have actually been the one organisation that stood up for us. It was the unions that kept us safe during COVID. It's the unions that have fought for the strike action. If anything, we need more people in unions. And in fact, the unions are democratic. So if you don't like that policy, you step up to the union, you go to the union conference and you change that policy like I'm trying to.
Yeah, but they still should not be taking our money and supporting those causes when those causes are against us. That's like basic common sense, Brent.
But they're not. They're not. They're not. I think a lot of the time, like students and teachers are played against each other. It's not one or the other. I do agree, though,
but when these things hit the headlines, when I'm looking at it from the outside, like I would just think, well, this is bizarre, right? What are you doing? Why are you going after these policies? Why are you supporting us in this way? And I'm not saying they're alone. I'm not saying it. I'm just saying it's all adding to the situation. So if we want to make things better, we've got to make things better together.
Okay, I think we've got slightly off. I agree with everything you're saying, but I'd like us to sort of focus on teacher recruitment. And I'm going to put some of the ideas that have been put forward by different, EEF and the NFER, or just on your point you said a while ago, Brent. Coming, like, I've taught here for 16 years, but I'm not from here. It is interesting when Australians come over to teach, just how dumbfounded they are by the workload. I would put that out there. Like, if we think, oh, well, isn't it the same? No, it's not the same. Like, you realize, like, teachers who come from Australia come here, and I could guarantee one of the reason they leave is they're like, I cannot believe what you guys do here for the money. It is insane. So we are, teacher workload. So big things for recruitment that I've seen is getting rid of fees. I don't know if the government could use the private school money to fund that. So what I mean is, like, for the PGCE, not making people have 10,000, bonding the bursary. So keeping the bursaries, but saying you have to actually teach. I don't know if we know this, but you can take the money for a bursary and never teach. You can take your 30,000 for maths and never have to teach again. So making it like bonded, and then I have seen some talk about making it bonded that you have to teach in a state school. Don't know how we feel about that. Obviously, teacher workload, advertising. So one of the big things I've seen, and I wrote down profession, that the advertising, I don't know if we see that, makes it look sort of fun, that you're somewhat gifted as a teacher. Yeah, you'll have bad days, but you talk to the kid and they come around. It actually does need to focus a bit more on the realism, which is it will be tough, it will be hard, but it's a rewarding profession that gives back to the community.
I love the ad. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
I don't know. You like the ad?
I find it a bit annoying when I see it in school holidays, but I love that. I love that ad. And
yeah, it's clearly not working though. Yeah, but I don't know what you think about some of those solutions anyway.
Yes, I think what was I going to say? I feel like I love the ad. For me, actually, we shouldn't tell teachers anything about the difficulties. And I think for me, I think a lot about how the difficulties vary based on where you are. And actually, I just think teaching should just be a bit less sink or swim. I know there are incredible schools and incredible managers and like a lot of incredible environments. I've, been lucky enough to be in some of those myself, but I just feel like there is too much of a variation in the experiences of people in their teacher training program or in their early qualified, teacher years. And that just shouldn't be the case. Like, it just shouldn't be the case. I know there's, support and frameworks on paper, but I think what often happens when new teachers join a school is actually at any level of your experience, but often it affects the least experienced most. I just think what happens is there's this very sink or swim culture, and cursory assessments on people's behavior, perceived behavior management, and based off of that, I feel like sometimes some teachers get more support than others. And I don't mean the support as in, being put on a plan, because I don't think most of the time that is a supportive measure for teachers. Obviously, if it's used correctly, it is. But I'm sure every teacher, I'm under no illusion that it isn't always used to be supportive. It's used in, the best interests of the school and what they have the time and their operational needs. But I just think for me, supporting teachers in those early years and in their training years is really important. And I also don't, even though I kind of understand it, I don't like that subjects are almost pitted against each other from the start. But because one subject can get a 30K tax-free, and I say this as a science teacher who did get a big bursary, but like, I just thought it was really unfair. I remember on my second placement, I was in a school where it was me, one other science teacher, and then everyone else was from, humanities, history, citizenship, English. And we were, the only people who had a bursary. And a lot of them, were struggling to find jobs because there weren't enough vacancies in their subjects in that particular area. And, there was just a big discussion. And I also feel like, because if you're going to say this subject is worth 30K in training and this one's worth nothing, then how can you, that attitude carries it over into schools, it carries over amongst teachers, it carries over amongst students. I just think there needs to be a lot more equity in education. And as it currently stands, I feel like there's just way too much variation. Like your trajectory in teaching can be so different just based on the subject that you're teaching or based on the area that you're in. And it just shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, it does.
I don't think that's realistic. Sorry, yeah. I just don't think that's realistic, Yasmin. As much as I agree with that in principle, if you've got subjects where people can earn way more money elsewhere, you're going to have to find some way of bringing them in. Otherwise, you just won't have them. They just won't exist. So then you end up with non-specialists teaching them in the first place. And that's not ideal either for the teacher themselves. Obviously, they didn't want to go into that subject, or for like the students, because it will take much longer. But having said that, I do think that within the profession, there's not enough ability to change your change. Do you see what I mean? Like, as in go from primary to secondary, etc. Right? Like, so like in most professions, you can kind of slightly shift yourself and go into different directions. I think it's harder within teaching, and I do think that's something we need to explore in terms of retaining people. Do people want to just have a different experience for a bit? Because sometimes that can be really useful. And I say that as like a Key Stage 2 teacher who spent time in Key Stage 1, and I felt really reinvigorated by that, right? And in some ways, that there's always been part of me, because history and politics has been my background. Yeah, would it be good to like go and teach that for a bit? But I need something here to be able to do that, right? Do we have enough options for teachers themselves? And like I said, as much as I don't agree with all the bursaries, I think we're going to have some. But I also think, we need to think seriously about why it is precisely why teachers are leaving, and then try and deal with that. And one of the things we're going to have to do, and I agree we're going to have to do, is to build those relationships with families. But I think we need to build them earlier. We need to build them stronger. And what we also need to do between primary and secondary is build those relationships together. Do you see what I mean? As in, we need to make those links, because a lot of their parents are our parents, right? So why are we not having these conversations? Why are we not supportive in the right way? But I do think some of this has to come from society itself, because if they're not, in the end, if people aren't willing to turn around and respect us, well, then they're going to end up with a situation where, you probably will just have some computer or some robot in front of you. And I don't think we need to get to that extreme before we actually understand what's going on. But I think what will then happen is that the richest people will end up with the teachers and the poorest won't. I genuinely think that, right? That's what's going to happen.
Sorry to interject, Tejinder. That's exactly a point that the unions made to me recently. It's exactly the point. I made that exact point to Daniel Kebedy recently. And you can listen back to Adam and I's show, where we literally put that to the risk is that the government will say, right, well, are they slowly hollowing out the teaching profession, deprofessionalizing it? This is how they're going to recruit more people. They're just not going to be teachers. They're just going to be baby minders, toothbrushers, nappy changers. They're going to be basically a body in a room that's, used to be a teacher. And they'll be, as you said, Tijinder, you're absolutely right. Within 20 years, somebody's going to go, wow, we used to have one of those people. You're a teacher, a proper teacher. Yeah, a proper teacher who knew their stuff. That's getting rarer and rarer. And I don't see that they are actually seeing the canary in the coal mine. I don't see that they are actually seeing. I think they've almost accepted this is the way it's going, because we are expensive. We have a pension. We are troublesome, let's be honest, because we're intelligent people and we like standing up for ourselves. So the solution to a teaching problem is to remove teachers, you know what I mean? And if I'm thinking cynically, that's what I'm going to do. But I'll come to one point, Tijinder, as well, you made about flexibility. In the last 3 years, I've taught physics, English, I've taught history, geography, I've taught reading, and I currently manage a football team. I'm a union rep, I'm a tutor. Environmental stuff is mine as well. In the last 20 years, I've been a citizenship coordinator, PhD coordinator, international schools coordinator. Within my school, I have done practically most roles. But here's the thing, sometimes not out of choice. I think it's a good point you're making, but I have been forced sometimes, look, we need somebody to teach physics. You've got geography in the background. Can you teach physics? Yeah, I'll go from teaching history lesson to a GCSE history lesson to a GCSE physics lesson. Absolutely bat-poo crazy. And I've just about got away with it. But others won't, and others don't resent that being forced out of their positions. And that's the problem.
Oh, yeah.
It's about choice. I would choose not to do that.
Yeah, the flexibility thing is massive. I think, coming back to what you're saying, Brent. So, I guess we can come back to our friend COVID, but post-COVID, it's clear that a lot of jobs have incredible flexibility. They're very appealing to young people. When I say young people younger than me, in their 20s and maybe 30s that are coming out of university. The idea being that, the idea of a long career isn't there anymore. You can do a job for 4 years, switch, 5, work at home. And teaching, it does say in one of the articles that is a massive thing, but nobody's really cracked it. I don't know if you guys, we don't have a huge amount of time before the next ad read, but
I think
that is a massive thing in terms of recruitment. What would you do? How do you make teaching more flexible in the way that people want it to be?
Well, we go back to the core thing. What is teaching? What is my job? What are I meant to do? Stick to that. Keep teachers teaching and get rid of all the other stuff. Keep us what we're meant to be. I think one of the other things I was going to mention was about debt. You take a young person now coming out of university, they're 70 or 80 grand in debt. What's the house prices? So if you want to solve that problem, why don't we have the government say, look, let's get discounts for people that get them on the housing market. Let's wipe off their student debt. You've trained hard, you've worked hard, stay and teach in 5 years, wipe off your student debt, and keep them here. Because I think it's disgraceful in the sixth wealthiest country in the world we punish people for wanting to be educated. So that's one thing you can do, because that would show the value of education and say, we value you being a teacher, we're going to wipe out your student debt, and in fact, we value the fact that you're bringing your skills into teaching. So that's something else.
Just to interrupt that, would you then agree that no fees for the PGCE on top of that?
Absolutely not. In fact, we should be paying people to do PGCE, because we want even older people, more mature people to come in and not be penalised for wanting to be a teacher. Yeah. We need everyone and anyone. We want the variety. We want the variety.
Sorry, can I also say, I don't understand why we can't have some basic media rules about what they can report on in schools and what they can't. I don't understand why we can't. Do you know, genuinely, right? Because we will never be able to respond back to a newspaper report in the way that those parents sometimes bring it in. Actually, do you know what? You don't have to have child follows rules as your big story. Like you said, Jasmine, you don't need it, right? It doesn't need to be splashed out there. Why are we approving of these things? Why is anybody making money out of it, right? Because if we genuinely respect teachers, because if we respect certain professions, we would say we're just not going to allow it, right? So if a doctor is being complained about, it doesn't get splashed immediately in a newspaper the same way that we get splashed on newspapers. And if we're talking about, we need better recruitment for teachers, we need improved leadership, etc., but then we've got to somehow take some of this pressure off us. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable thing to say or do.
No, totally. I agree. That I honestly, I was going to say, I just feel like there has to be regulation in the media. Every year in September, you will have kids honestly, every year, like clockwork, there is a kid with their arms crossed over on the cover of, it's somewhere on the news.
Let me do my best compo face.
Because they've refused wearing trainers, or just something. And it's awful. And exactly that. Like, it's gotten to the point now where, a lot of schools, in an attempt to protect their reputation, will actually throw teachers under the bus. Like, I've got a friend who was referred to the TRA by a parent because she refused to move a child to sit with their friend. And, she got a TRA referral. She just ended up getting an email from the TRA that said, you've been reported to us, but we're just letting you know we're not taking any further action, but just to let you know. And that's crazy. And that's now happening because it's become so normal now. It's like cancel culture really increased during COVID, just in every kind of industry. And what now happens to teachers is, you can take a complaint to a school, and if you don't feel like it's been adequately dealt with, you can just go put it on Twitter and hope that it picks up. And some of them do. And
Jasmine, the worst part.
Sorry, guys, to cut you off because our
one point, Jasmine.
Sorry, Fred, very quickly.
Just 1 point. The thing about that is the people who get the worst of that are the teachers that hold the line, the teachers that stand up to parents, the teachers that have the courage. And they're the ones who actually schools need the most, because they've got the courage to hold the line, challenge the children, challenge the parents. But they are the biggest targets, and they're the ones that are hollowing out. And they are the stalwarts, the old school teachers, the ones that vested in their communities, the lifers. And I've seen so many of them being shoved out because they're more expensive. And I think to myself, put on capability. Why is that? Because they're more expensive. And unfortunately, that's been happening across the whole sector, where we've seen some of our best educators being pounded out of the education system and not defended. And that's what we need to sort of think. We need to celebrate those people who have the courage to stand up some bully parents, rather than, as you say, sometimes they're expendable. And to placate and to appease some parents, they do sacrifice those teachers to because sometimes some parents who shout loudest, threaten the press, threaten Ofsted, they just get what they want, and that's got to stop. We've got to hold the line.
Yeah, totally. There needs to be regulation.
Sorry, guys. I've just, like I said, I've been told by our wonderful producer that we need to do the next ad read and move on to our next topic. But just very quickly, just to finish it very, very fast, one thing that you would do to help recruit, mine is no fees for PGCE. Yasmin?
More support for teachers in their training years.
Brilliant. Brent?
Drop the student debt and their student loans.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Tajinder?
I'm going to say regulation of the media.
Fantastic. All right. I think we have some sort of agreement there. We've solved the recruitment crisis. Right. So back to our wonderful sponsors for today. So Kialo, BET award-winning Kialo Edu is 100% free tool for thoughtful and inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialoedu.com. And John Catt, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishers of professional development, books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order today. So our next topic is our education minister saying, one, that absenteeism is a problem. I think we all agree there. And two, that schools need to use old-fashioned hard graft to solve it. Now, I don't know about you guys. I've read, and you might be able to tell me what old-fashioned hard graft is. I don't know if it was explained or I've missed something. Brent's rubbing his eyes in frustration. Maybe he has a solution. I'm guessing get out there and drive around, write letters, maybe. Brent, do you want to pick this up? Seeing it's something very passionate about.
Here comes again. It's school's problem. It's not. When you take away Sure Start, when you take away the social services, when you take mental health, when you don't solve the SEND crisis, you don't send any funding, when you don't you don't send any increased sort of staffing to schools, when you've got a curriculum which is dull as dishwater and discriminates against working class kids, when you've got a narrative now of parents who think education is not important, you're saying, let's find parents. It's not working. We need to make schools more attractive. We've got to make schools places that kids want to come in. We've got to make schools more interesting. We've got to make schools the 21st century. We're still doing post-industrial education in a 21st century world. And unfortunately, some parents are devalued because of the Tashinder's saying the narratives in the media. We're seeing people just saying education is not as important. I value education, but I just think a lot of parents now in this 24/7 culture think to themselves, I don't need to send the kids to school. I can educate them myself. I can educate them home. I can do a better job. And the more the more schools decline, there is a correlation between this and then actually what's happening. Some people just say they're buying out of school. And I agree with the government that we need to do something about it, but they need to take care of their end of the bargain and stop pushing it down on us and saying schools aren't working hard enough. Really sorry to burst your bubble. How much more do you want us to do? Do you want us to go out and get on our hands and knees on the doorstep and beg parents to send kids to school? We can't do that. And the problem with that is the more you do for those type of parents, they'll expect a taxi service. I have actually had that situation where our officer for attendance is basically saying, a parent rang up and says, are you not coming today to pick my child up? Are you not coming today to pick my child up? Because you've done that once, the parent assumed that they're just going to provide that service. And I think that's what the really unrealistic expectations of schools are. With schools just mission creep into, we do everything now. And when you have headlines like, we're going to be doing toothbrushing for children, and then saying, let's get out there and actually, get kids to come. I'm sorry, something is disconnected. The social contract for me is kind of broken. And yes, there's things we need to do in school about managing bullying, about toxicity. But when you've got the most examined children in Western Europe, you're scared to do exams. You're over-examined all because of league tables. There's where it starts. Take the temperature of schools down. Make schools nicer places for kids and staff to work in. De-stress. Take the toxicity down. Make schools fun again. And I'm not saying to pander to kids, making it fun because that's hit to the kids. No, you want intrinsic motivation. I want kids to want to come to school because they want to come to school. School's brilliant. School's fun. School's a place where they can feel safe. And the problem with all of that is when you don't have funding and all those other things, education is just in a downward spiral. Some parents are saying, well, it's not that important, is it? So no, I'm pushing back on the government and saying, sort your end out. Don't lecture us and pontificate to us about what we need to do. Hard graft needs to come from your ministry, and hard graft needs to come from the education minister, and hard graft needs to come. I hard grafted all the way for 21 years. Let me see the education department hard graft the way that we hard graft. So that's another pecking order pushing down. So no disrespect to her. Why didn't she get out in a taxi, start bringing these kids into school? Or why doesn't she turn around and set up some system like the attendance officers, pay local councils, underfunded local councils, to get some of those officers who work around the town centres like they used to, picking up kids and saying, get yourself into school. They took that funding away. So why don't they put that type of stuff back in place and the support for us back in place rather than just throwing us under the bus? And exactly what we were saying last week, there we are thrown under the bus again. It's our fault. No, I don't think it is our fault. I'm sorry. And I'm not blaming some parents on this because they're working 3 and 4 jobs to try and a cost of living crisis. And that's difficult for some parents, and it's easy to condemn them and say they're terrible parents. And I'm not falling into that middle class trap. these parents these days, some of them are really struggling and need our help. And the government need to help them, and the government needs to organise situations where they don't condemn people and fine them and say you're a terrible parent because your child's not going to school. We need to help these people to help themselves, and that's what we need to start doing. Sorry, that one really winds me up.
Oh, I love that. I love that, Brent. I honestly love that. And
no, I can't disagree with anything, really.
Exactly. And I really agree. And I feel like, exactly as you said, Brent, like the last thing schools need is to be lectured any further. And again, I feel like the way this has been reported in the media, it just often feeds into this, idea that teaching is a DOS, like schools aren't really, they're not pulling their weight, they're not doing enough. And yet I don't know a single teacher who isn't doing more than they're even expected to be. And, I would also vouch for parents, though. Like I would say, in my last my last SLT role, one of my responsibilities was attendance of persistent absentees. And honestly, like the overwhelming majority of parents were really trying their best. And exactly as you said, Brent, there was just no funding, no additional support, and I just think that where does this idea that schools need to do more and more and more and more just come from? Like why, like, there's like been a decimation of so many public services. Schools are like often a standalone for children. They're often the primary place where, the concerns are even picked up about children, whether they're medical, whether it's related to mental health, whether it's, a learning need. Like schools just already do so much and they're never really credited for it. And if anything, every government will just come in and then place even more expectation on schools, or just, say that schools aren't doing enough. And I've just always wondered, like, where does that come from? Like, is it the wider perception we were talking about earlier about, the teaching profession and schools? Like, where does this come from that teachers aren't doing enough?
I'm going to say I am actually going to disagree with Brent on two things. The first thing is the idea, like, you may hate the knowledge curriculum, but the fact of the matter is what we had before was not great. And it didn't help. And I'll say this possibly more from my perspective as a primary teacher, because there are things that you cannot bypass. Sorry, there's just things that you can't. There's basic knowledge that has to be taught in order for other knowledge to be taught. And it can't always be edutainment and it can't always be fun. But the point is also this: what is fun for one person is not going to be fun for another. If you love history, you're going to think things are fun that other people won't. Like, I love timelines, and you may absolutely hate a timeline. Right? You might think it's the most boring thing ever, but what I can't do is shift one thing for another for different people. You've got to have that integrity within the subject. And we did lose integrity within subjects, and we did let a lot of working class children down, quite frankly. So I'm not going to have that we were fine before. I'm not having this amnesia going on. There was no issue for a while there where we did lose standards. I'm not saying there was a golden age before, but at least we got more people through from more difficult backgrounds, particularly in England. So if it's different elsewhere, it's different elsewhere. But the fact of the matter is we did used to do that. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say you want us to be respected and then say, oh, but we just have to be fun factories, right? And I'm not saying that we need to be deliberately boring. That's not what I'm saying. But my point is, we can't keep chasing fads and things like that either. Now, in terms of like everything else you pretty much said, I do agree with. I mean, ultimately, we've got to have that agreement as a society that we are going to educate children, and we have got to find ways to do that. But I don't think Bridget Phillipson really has a handle on what we actually do. I don't think she's been to enough schools. I don't think she's talked to enough teachers. And if I'm honest, from what I have heard people say, this seems to be like it's her job for the time being. But what she really wants to do is be a leader. This is just like a step up for her, right? This is not someone who genuinely loves education at some level. Do you see what I mean? Right? Because you can disagree with various education secretaries, but if they genuinely had some love for it or some sort of concept of their own, it came across, whether you liked it or not. Even people like Gove, you can kind of give them something here. Whereas this is just like, it's just pure, like, it's just like, what does she mean? Like you say, what does she mean by graph? What do you think it is that we're not doing? Be precise. What is it exactly that's not happening? Because I like everybody else here, all I'm seeing is people work harder and harder and harder to get children in and support families with very little additional support and money. And there are times when I feel like we're not being given the dues that we want, because in some ways what we were talking about before with retention and recruitment, well, if we're not doing the job that teachers do, if that's not what we're doing, then you're not going to get more of us, are you? Do you see what I mean? Like, the thing that would make you want to go into teaching isn't existing. If you're a reception teacher, genuinely a good one, and you can do the child led, you can do the adult led, you can do, you can marry that. And it is a particular skill. I genuinely believe that. I think good EYFS teachers are incredible. I wouldn't necessarily want to do that because because I don't think I've got the skill set for it, but I do admire them. But why would you want to do that if you spend an hour every day changing nappies, if you have to brush the children's teeth? Do you see what I mean? It's no longer your job. It's no longer what you went in for. So why would you want to do that? And so where does the motivation come then? So what you've got people in schools doing is they are basically going to end up in a situation where you're going to recruit people who just want a job for a bit and they move on, and then you're still going to have the turnover and the issues. And I agree, we are de-skilling. We may come at it from different angles, Brent, but I don't think that we're completely at odds here, because if we want the profession that we want, we can't just keep adding more and more roles to schools and turning them into something they're not. What we can
and that I agree with, but I will pick up on the curriculum. I taught history 21 years. I have such an over-bloated history curriculum that does not meet the needs of learners. And worse than that, because of the baccalaureate that Go set up, I'm shoehorning children into a subject that they're not capable of doing to meet the needs of a point score, so that we can game a system to get, a better Ofsted. We have the most examined children. I want to teach children for the sake of teaching them. I want them to learn for the sake of learning. I want them intrinsically motivated because I want them to choose what it is best. What our comment there, we need more European model. People need to choose a specialism pathway that maybe has more engagement. I have a school next door to me. It was an engineering school. When we go come in and everybody has to write an essay now, I turned the English curriculum into the most dull as dishwater, kind of Victorian stuff. We've got to update the 21st century. Where's artificial intelligence? Where's computers? When I look at other countries and I look how they're embracing the future, we're still doing almost Latin and stuff like that. Now, it is important you have some classics in there, but I think our curriculum does not match the 21st century. Kids now, when you look at social media, the way they've been educated, I think they now think they get more outside school than they used to. When I went to school, school was cutting edge. The computers in school were the best. My teachers were way ahead of the curve. We're playing catch up now, and that's where it is that our actual curriculum needs to match the time that we're in, not the time that Gove went to school in the 60s and some grammar school in Edinburgh. That's the problem. And yes, you need some standards. You need academic children doing academic subjects, but you need hands-on practical children doing hands-on practical subjects. Look at the skills gap. We haven't enough truck drivers. We haven't enough actual tradespeople. And people are complaining about immigration coming in. That's because we don't have the skills, because our children at school are learning stuff that's absolutely no relevance whatsoever to the jobs. Employers are saying that. Even universities saying that. So knowledge-based curriculum, I do agree with knowledge. Absolutely, I do. But the problem is we're living in a world where the children can get knowledge at a fingertip. It's about what they do with the knowledge. And the problem is I'm looking at some children who are doing 11 GCSEs and their brains are just overloaded. We have, on one hand, we know about cognitive overload. We know about the science of cognitive overload. And yet we have an exam system which examines children at 15 when their brain's getting rewired. And then we're piling all this into them, and some of them break. They can't cope with it. And it is actually disadvantaging, especially children from poorer backgrounds, because they don't have the cultural capital. They don't have the quiet room and the laptop and the tutor there. And all the statistics show that the social mobility is decreasing. We saw it during COVID with the algorithms spatted out. The exam system is not fair. What we're asking children to do is not fair. We are destroying their love of learning. My own daughter at 7 years old did stats. It nearly broke her. It nearly broke my daughter at 7 years old to feel as if she felt like a failure at 7 years old. And it took her mother as a psychologist and her father as a teacher to override that. But not every child has a psychologist or a teacher overriding it and saying, don't you worry about it. Some of those children are, in the Dweckian says, they feel like failures, they stay as failures, and the curriculum is just letting them down because they just can't meet that. They can't write an essay. They can't do it like that. But then again, why are we writing essays in the 21st century when artificial intelligence can do it in 4 seconds? Walk into an exam hall in the middle of June when it's absolutely roasting, and you're asking kids to recite and resuscitate information somewhere up in the back of their brain while they're basically a teenager. When you think about it and take a step back and say, it's an absolute unbelievable gauntlet. We have unhappy children because they don't feel as if they can achieve. And
sorry, you're just going off on a rant now. And actually, it's not good enough. We've already been through this whole 21st century nonsense so many times, right? And all it did was...
We're in the 21st century.
We have done it so many times. every single rubbish fad that I ever had to teach, which made me not want to teach, was because we need the 21st education. Look, I actually think that there is one point that I will concede, which I do think there's a difference between primary and secondary. And I think what we did, we inverted it in primary, and we took away so much of the knowledge, so much of the basic knowledge that we needed to teach. Right. And if we got it right there, because at the end of the day, if you're primary, it is reading, writing, and maths. Ultimately, you've got to get those things right. You've got to do certain things. And it will always be slightly old fashioned in primary. And I don't mind that. And if you want to go off and do more stuff later on, that's up to you. But what you can't keep doing is gutting primary and gutting the experience of children, because if they cannot learn to read and write at that basic level in schools, the failure they feel carries on over. And I'm not saying that we need SATs, but what I'm saying is we keep going through these phases where we drop the standards and the standards aren't there. Then we test the children to see if the standards are there. No, they're not. Right, let's keep testing, right? So why can't we just be sensible about it and say, primary needs to do certain tasks really well. And I think our curriculum is over bloated as well, right? Because every problem that you have in secondary can't be solved by sticking an objective into primary, right? Like, because that's what they did with maths. And I do agree with that, right? But what we have to do is teach that basic knowledge properly. Now, you may agree or disagree with essays, but you're never going to bypass human intelligence. What will happen again in the end is that you will have this difference between the children who will be taught essays, because it will be the richest who will still make their children write essays, and they will be more intelligent as a result. Not in every subject. I'm not saying in drama. I was listening to Martin Robinson at like Research Ed Brom the other week, and actually he's got a point, right? We've gone, in some subjects, we've gone too far the other way. We need to think about these subject specialists. And then I do agree that we need to make vocational education much, much better. But I still think in primary, we need to have a certain amount of knowledge taught to those children, and it needs to be taught properly. And it cannot be fun factory. Sorry, it can't. Some of the most
intelligent. Can I jump in for a second? Yeah, I've got a couple of things. I do slightly. I mean, I think you're saying a lot of great stuff, Brett, but I've got to disagree with you on one thing. Have you asked AI to write you an essay? I mean, the garbage it would spit out, it's like a combination of the world's smartest and stupidest person put together and wrote an essay. I do think we've got to be careful about what you're saying about the curriculum in a sense. I spend a lot of time in Italy, learning Latin, and the most boring curriculum. If like Britain, like I'm not saying we're great, but there are some innovative parts about it. It's not just that our curriculum is so outdated. I mean, go and compare it to Italy's and you'll feel like we are one of the most advanced in the world. Now, I know there's up and downs, but this idea, like they are 13 subjects, absolute, the most traditional type of education, quite dull. And I don't think they have the problems with absenteeism we do. Hard graft, my comment on that is around us. I know you said about the buses. I see buses every day picking up kids, people knocking on doors in my street, principal at the local school having breakfasts with the parents whose kids are school refusers. So again, I'm like, what more does Phillipson want them to do? We've got principals going door to door. This is more of a question, and this is also a plug. In my last show for TTR, Dr. Jo Williams, who was my guest, she put it down, the absentees, because it goes, COVES changes, whatever we want to debate. We don't really see the massive absenteeism until after COVID. She says that when they closed the schools, it told parents, school's not that important. And so that's where it all starts from. Now, I'm not a biologist, I'm not getting into debate if that was right or not, but it sent a message to parents, which is, you don't really need school. It's not that important. It's the first thing we closed. That was a dangerous message. That's my question. I'm not going to say I've got an opinion on it. Like I said, it's almost too difficult. But does anybody have any thoughts on that it is COVID that really started this off? You're giving that message, or we're disagreeing violently?
Sorry, I think COVID's been used as a smokescreen. I think COVID's been used as a convenient excuse. What happened during COVID? Kids were off for a couple of months. We were educating them still way through. Schools were open. The schools are actually open. I was teaching all the way through COVID. So no, I don't accept that. I think there's more to learning than actually if some of the kids actually get back from COVID better off. Some of my neurodivergent children, I think of one child in particular, who ended up thriving because he was at home and he was getting the best of both worlds. He was getting his teacher and also his parent, and his parent was sitting in on my actual teaching. So some children thrived during COVID because they didn't have to come into schools, which they find some toxic, and they find no issues, so they could learn in their calm environment. So that's one of the problems, is that's what I think led to the rise of homeschooling, that people realized you can have the best of both worlds. But we explored things like hybrid learning. We should be looking at things like hybrid learning, because education should be happening in multiple places. School is not the only place that kids get educated. And that's the key thing as well about educating the educators. We need to work on parents. We need to help parents engage. And that was one of the things during COVID that I thought was actually the important thing that was missed, is that parents themselves realized, oh my God, what are the kids doing at school? I can't do this, I can't do that. That's fine. So why don't we teach the parents how to teach the children? Because ultimately speaking, I see children 1 or 2 hours a week. Same as behavior. What impact do I have actually on that child for that 1 or 2 hours? What the environment they have, their community has, their parents, their grandparents, that whole thing. I wasn't educated as much at school as I was educated outside school. And I think that's what we're missing now, about the greater responsibilities to the whole of society. It takes a community to raise a child, and therefore the community should be involved. And it comes back to choice. It comes back to the school curriculum should sometimes meet the area and actually meet the community's needs. Where you turn around and say, we've got practical hands-on, we've got an engineering company there, we want our children to be more practical in this area. But you take the Industrial Revolution, that's what actually happened in some areas where companies used to come in. We need to make those connections. Where what's the purpose of education? To create an all-rounded individual, but also give them that chance of life where they have hope and they have a future and they can see a future. Because at the moment they don't. The moment now there's almost this get rich quick. I'll just go on the internet and be an online person, or I'll be you ask the kids what do they want to be in the future. They want to be an influencer, but the thing is that's a quick easy. I'll be online. I'll go online. I'll get 50,000 subscribers and I'll earn money. So there's kids almost think themselves they can bypass education. In some ways, they've seen the modelling of that. And you get your Andrew Tates and people like that who are saying, don't play by the rules, don't do this, do that, here, get rich that. And that's where we need to role model that and say, look, value education, value going to school, value that future, because that's what I was given. My parents were, you're going to university, son. It was not negotiable. And that's where we have to work, I think, not so much on the kids. I think we have to work on the people who are educating the kids and the primary educators. And that's down to the government as well. They need to start making the case that education is valuable and change the narrative, which goes back to the brilliant point you made earlier on, Tishinder, about the media, about that narrative of school is important. Why is school important? Well, school is important because school is what we need society. This is a societal issue. It's sort of relaunching the social contract, so to speak, of what we value education as part of the greater project of this country. Because at the moment, the whole country's in managed decline. Schools are in managed decline. There's just a horrible feeling of everything's going downward, and yet they keep dumping more on us. And I think education has to be one of the most important things, because education, for instance, in my local community, turned a working class area and into people who have got vested in their community.
Sorry, there was a comment, and it said, which agreed with you, just said that shone a light on what was already broken. And I know this might seem like it's this is coming from a different angle, but I think part of what we also need to do is to support parents to actually have that relationship as a wider society, not us personally, but do you know what? What is our family policy? It's basically shove everybody into work as soon as possible. I don't think we've got the credits and the tax breaks and everything quite right at all, right? And actually what we need to do is to value not just those, because look, when they come to us, they've already had 4.5 years, right? 3.5 years, whatever, of whatever they've had. And if their parents can't spend the time with them, and I think, so, like you say, some of the parents realized that they couldn't, but also some of the parents just went, well, I can kind of just keep this child here like this and it's easier for me. So you've got various different people doing various different things. But I do think there's a lot of overworked parents who don't spend enough time with their children in the first place to give them the support and the love and the care they deserve, not because they don't want to, but because they just don't have it there. And I think we need to look much bigger and much wider and not just say it's the school's problem, right? School fix it. Because we can't fix it alone. Like right now, like my brother and sister-in-law are in quite a envious position whereby she doesn't have to work necessarily. Like she wants to go back like next year. But my niece has had 2 years, right? And I look at her, and maybe I'm looking at it with different eyes now, having been a teacher for so long. But I look at what she can do, and I can look at what the equivalent of her sometimes can or cannot do. And it worries me, it bothers me. And that comes just from her being able to have that time and support with the parents in the right way. Do you know what I mean? So what we try and do, we just keep trying to fix what is already broken, but where is it breaking down? We need to think bigger, but it's not good enough for government to go, well, you fix it now in schools because we can pull that lever, when there are other levers they could potentially pull if they wanted to.
Yeah, agree.
Cool. I mean, we're almost out of time. So sort of final comments. Yas, we haven't heard from you for a little while. What are your
I
thoughts?
know, guys. So you can probably tell I haven't been awake for very long today. But I was also going to say, with COVID, I think as well, sometimes we forget that COVID wasn't just lockdown for a lot of people. And, you know, there were a lot of people who actually lost first degree, second degree, just family in general, friends, etc. And I think one of the things that has happened since COVID is because of like, you know, like almost trebling of waiting lists for like practically every service, it's just put further strain on schools. And I do think that's a part of COVID that's forgotten a lot of the time, that actually, you know, thousands of people used to die every single day. And that has actually inevitably had a huge impact on some children and families. And, you know, I think that has a knock-on effect, you know, when you come back to school. And I think actually a lot of children, like, I just feel like that's a part of COVID that has almost kind of been forgotten, you know. And actually, you know, I had children coming back to school saying, I lost my parents, I lost my grandparents, I lost, you know, my cousins, I lost these people, and my neighbors died. And actually, you know, school just continued. And I would absolutely say it's not the responsibility of school. I know schools, you know, they love their children, they love their communities, and every school would have done what they could to support their pupils who are bereaved. But like, I just feel like this disappearance of every other service has actually had such a huge impact on children. And I actually think sometimes people lose sight of that when it comes to COVID. And, you know, it wasn't just a lockdown for a lot of people. And that's just what I wanted to throw in.
Yeah, cool. So we are almost out of time. So I'm going to pitch the final thing is, I totally agree. Basically, I know we got areas of disagreement, but I think what Phillipson said is just terrible. I don't know what else schools could be doing. I mean, I know what you're saying, Brent, in a total like culture shift, but as in actual hard graft, I'm dumbfounded by that comment, because I just think, my God, we're driving a bus every morning and knocking on doors. You know, that is not something I ever thought schools would be doing in my neighborhood, and they do it every morning. So I just think, back to what you were saying, Tajinder, it really makes me think, has she actually been out and seen what schools are doing before she says that? Like, what hard graft? Knocking on doors, they knock on doors. So that's my final comment done. Thanks so much for joining us.
Just make one last point.
Oh yeah, of course.
One last point.
Yeah.
I suppose I'd sum it up by saying they've got to stop outsourcing parenting, outsourcing services, outsourcing everything to schools. It's just basically like, you know, we're now the dumping ground.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. Everything seems to be outsourced to us.
Yes.
And worse than that, you tie the two stories together. They're outsourcing to us while also underfunding us and understaffing us, and then blaming us for things that we aren't meant to do, but they've outsourced to us. So there's the sort of summation of, you know, stop outsourcing to schools. We're schools, that's what our job in education is.
Yep.
Yes, we'll help the community, but we've only got so much capacity. And then stop, obviously, when you're outsourcing to us, then blaming us for the thing you've outsourced to us, which we're not meant to be doing. And
then wondering why people don't want to be teachers. So I think on that point, I think we're all in agreement, at least on that. Thanks so much. Yeah, brilliant way to end, Brent. Nothing to add. Thanks so much, everybody watching. Hope you enjoyed. It's always a lively conversation when we got Tajinder and Brent on. There's no doubt about it. And have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. Thanks so much.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.